Hi, this is Mike Ernest. I'm excited to share this communication and soft skills dilemma presentation with you because it really sheds light on a common challenge that we all have had in trying to grow organizations. Because we all know that communication plays a major role in business productivity. As a matter of fact, it's part of the trilogy of people, processes, and technology. And much different than processes and technology, however, where those two things are very clear and measurable, and we get feedback on what's working, what's not working. We can tweak and test, and again, it's very obvious. But when we get to the people part of it, it's much less clear. And we can even break the people component into two parts. And the first part is more clear and easy for people to observe than the second. And the first one is the technical skills. And most of the time when we're employed by an organization, there's a certain technical component that we need to demonstrate competency in for us to justify the employment. So, for example, if you're an accountant, it's being able to demonstrate competency and an ability and a track record to be proficient in those set of skills. However, that technical side is a much smaller component than the people skills side, which is the second part of people. And that's the part that has everything to do with how well we work together. How can we collaborate together? How do we problem solve? How do we innovate? How do we minimize conflict and find solutions? That people skills section is actually much more important and much more valued than the technical skills. Technical skills are more of an ante and how we get into the position and into the game. But the people skills portion is really what companies value. And you don't need to test that any further than just look at who moves through and moves up through an organization. And if we stick with our accountants, whether it's an accountant within an organization or an accounting firm, certainly at the top of the organization, you're not going to find the best accountants. Matter of fact, I've worked with lots of accounting organizations, and never once has the managing director or the leader ever said, "Yep, I've gotten here because of my accounting prowess." It's always something else, and it has to do with the people skills component. But the challenge is that people skills has been very elusive for us to be able to really get our arms around, identify and say, all right, well, if it's so important, then let's help our people become better. And in fact, we try that from time to time, but we've also learned that improving people's soft skills or people skills has proven very difficult. One of the challenges is that everyone feels that they are good communicators to start with. So there isn't really a group of people raising their hands saying, wow, I really want to improve this area of my professional career. A second challenge is that it's hard to demonstrate improvement on both sides of the equation. On the demonstrating, here's what we want from you is fairly unclear, as well as providing feedback on how are they doing. That's also been quite a challenge. And so ultimately, there's been a poor track record for an ROI on training. So after we get beat up a few times, we don't really want to go back to that well. And that's how most organizations look at soft skills. So what I began to learn was that one of the challenges with communication and soft skills, or grouped together, we could call them people skills, is really it's a global concept. And when you look at learning about it and reading about it, it stays very global. And we learn how to communicate verbally and non-verbally. We can learn to gain rapport. We can learn to influence others and provide critical feedback. And we can learn better to resolve conflict and problem-solving skills. And the list goes on and on and on. But the challenge is that although they're great concepts and knowledge, they're not practical for improving business results. And thus the bad reputation that anything to do with improving communication skills gets a tough rap in business, and for very good reason. But during my turnaround days and working with over 350 companies was that those people skills, those communication and soft skills were absolutely part and parcel to my success and failures in working with groups and organizations. And so that equation, I just couldn't let it go. And I kept looking and thinking about it and working and studying. And what I began to tease out of that people skills arena was that that's too macro. But if you took it down to the conversation level, it became much more manageable. And if we looked at it from a conversational management skills, which becomes a specific subset of communication and soft skills, we had something that was much more actionable, much more measurable, because it focuses on improving specific conversational outcomes to generate measurable business results. It also makes individuals and groups more effective where it matters most to the company. And we refer to it now as the conversational quotient, or CQ, which is literally a person's intelligence level for being able to manage important conversations. So what occurred to me was, rather than trying to fight the macro global fight of trying to improve communication amongst an organization, it was smarter, more practical, and more measurable that we could identify some key conversational results that were not going well enough for the organization. And then we could develop the skills necessary to better manage that conversation to get better outcomes. And what we learned was that that's a winnable game. Unlike trying to teach a group of people in an 8-hour course on how to minimize conflict, or how to communicate more effectively together. So it was pretty practical, but I think it helps to see it visually. So what I've created is a slide that demonstrates company initiatives, key conversations, and the effects that CQ has on them. And in this example that I've created, it's really a typical one, almost cliche. And the initiative is to increase revenues from existing customers. And when we look at that type of an initiative and we break it more into an execution series of steps, we can see that in the very beginning we have a strategic idea. And then if all is executed well and goes to plan, the very last thing that we would see would be an increase in revenue being reported. And then those boxes represent the steps and the tasks necessary to properly and completely execute on that initiative. So if we look at that from an organizational standpoint, what we see is we have multiple groups of people doing different things kind of along a timeline, and there's quite a few activities getting ready to sell additional services to customers. And how key conversations play into this initiative discussion is because when you look at all of the activities and all the discussions and conversations that take place throughout an initiative, you'll see that there are certain conversations that are far more important and far more telling for the success of the initiative than others. And so in my example, what I demonstrated was a typical one between a salesperson and a customer, meaning there were a lot of activities that got to that particular conversation, but the outcome of that particular conversation is going to have a major effect on the overall success of the initiative. So we get to a decision point on whether the conversation was successful and the process continues, and the conversation wasn't successful, which would mean that initiative would come to an end for that particular customer and it would not be successful. So hopefully that's clear as to how that is a key conversation in this initiative. And what's fascinating is that we oftentimes don't see that. We don't realize that there are certain conversations that are far more important, and we don't necessarily prepare more for those or take those more seriously or do things to ensure that those conversations go as well as possible. And so how CQ plays into both now the initiative as well as the key conversation is in how well prepared, how effective is the person going to be at managing that conversation with the customer. So a person with a high level of CQ, a high level of intelligence in knowing what they need to do to best manage important conversations like this to come to a favorable outcome for the organization, they're going to do things like show up overly prepared for that particular conversation. They're going to be able to open up that conversation with a mutual purpose to help the customer understand that the company is really thinking about their best interest, and they want to clarify a way to work together with these additional services that really is mutually beneficial. And the salesperson will only ask quality questions because all questions aren't necessarily created equal. So they're prepared with great quality questions. And when they ask those questions, they have the discipline to listen without interrupting and really let that customer explain and kind of think through as they talk what's the best way to proceed. And the salesperson would test their suggestions on kind of what they're hearing, what they think we should do or they should do next as a result of the conversation. And then at the very end of the conversation, that salesperson who has a great level of CQ will ensure that there's a mutual agreement as to what each party is going to do as a result of the conversation. So that's a quick rundown on a person with a high level of CQ and how they're going to approach that conversation. And on the flip side, a lower level CQ person is going to not be as prepared. They won't do as good of a job of opening up the conversation and having the customer understand that we're really working on collaboratively on trying to come up with a solution that makes sense for everybody. They wouldn't be prepared and they wouldn't have thought through the most important questions that need to be asked to best develop the business case. They oftentimes will interrupt the customer and not allow for that dialogue to really develop and take place. And they'll make suggestions that are much more focused on whatever makes sense for the organization versus taking in the constraints and the needs of the customer. And they oftentimes will leave an important meeting like this or conversation and not even be clear on who's going to be doing what next or not getting to that level of agreement that is so important. So that's how CQ affects the key conversations and how the key conversations affect initiatives. And what I found is fascinating in doing all the different projects that I've done over the last number of years is you can decompose any initiative whether it's at a company level, like the one I'm explaining here, or you can look at it within a department, or you can even break down individual people's initiatives. And what we see is that there are key conversations that need to go in a certain direction or obtain a certain outcome in order for that initiative to be successful. But we rarely identify those, and then even more rarely do we over-prepare for those to make sure that we have as likely success as possible. Another thing I wanted to point out is it's not like there's just one key conversation initiatives. There are oftentimes a number of them. This was just an easy one to point out. But when you look at even the dynamics of this initiative that I put forth, there are plenty of other potentially very important conversations. And one of my favorite ones is the initial one that we see here between the client services person and the executive management. So often over the years, I've seen those conversations not have the quality of dialogue that they should have, and the executive manager runs off with some poor information or not clear information, makes some bad assumptions, and then spends an enormous amount of time and energy and money executing on a solution that really had no merits in the first place. So a lot of different potential conversations that could come from a big initiative like this. But the real point is, in any initiative, there will be key conversations. And then the people managing those conversations, their level of CQ will ultimately have a major impact on the overall success of the initiative. So that was an example of where low CQ did not help the outcome of a conversation between a salesperson and a customer, ultimately having a negative effect on the overall strategy of increasing revenues through selling additional services to customers. But there are lots of other problems that are generated when people don't have the intelligence and the discipline to manage important conversations well. So when we look at productivity issues, they can come up in customer retention and profitability issues, failed company and project initiatives, technology utilization and adoption challenges, higher sales costs than required, and conflict between departments. I mean, all of those can come from not listening, not asking the right questions, not developing the right business cases, not being responsive to people's concerns and needs, and the list could go on and on. On the employee issue side, at the more granular level, we'll see lower engagement levels across the board. People not feeling heard, and not feeling that they're cared about, not believing that they can make a difference. And when you look at those three are the hallmark for what does it take to get employees to really put their heart and soul into an organization and into initiatives and into growing. And if they're not getting that type of an engagement from their managers, it really deflates the overall level of energy that organizations have. Another issue is chronic conflict amongst people, and also inadequate employee growth. It doesn't take much experience in business or much imagination to realize how detrimental it is when we don't listen, when we don't ask, when we don't understand, when we make assumptions. And all of that has to do with a person's CQ. And on the flip side, when we look at the opportunities stemming from CQ growth, we see that key conversation results improve percentages of customers' decisions to buy from the company more frequently or stay longer. Employee reviews can create clarity and urgency for stronger professional development. Project meetings where higher quality and more sensitive information is shared. More productive management meetings where clear outcomes and next steps are clarified. Other opportunities include communication skills become visible and actionable to the organization. One thing that we see in working with organizations, we can enhance performance reviews to actually include people skills and be able to be very clear and articulate with what we're looking for from our people in that next level up. Another opportunity is the individual's accountability for more disciplined communication increases because they're more clear on what they can do to better manage conversations and how they should, and they have expectations of their self. So that self-discipline or that personal accountability goes up, which is a beautiful thing. Another one is that it creates a culture of staying more aware of other people's point of view. I think that's a major one when you look at a person with higher CQ than a person with a lower one, is that there's more empathy, there's more appreciation, there's more understanding, and there's a whole lot less mind reading and assumptions being made by that person who has that higher level of CQ. They've learned that through asking questions, they get much better information than they had ever had by just thinking they knew what the other person was meaning and wanting and was concerned about. Another obvious one is a reduction in conflict and unproductive meetings. When we have more discipline to approach conversations in a more respectful way, and we understand better what it takes to alienate people or push people away or get them upset, and we avoid those bad habits, obviously we also avoid conflict and those unproductive meetings that none of us enjoy sitting through. And then the most exciting thing overall is that the company speeds up. There is so much wasted energy on conflict and things taking longer than necessary because of lack of understanding, lack of collaboration. And there are much fewer bad decisions made, bad initiatives kicked off, and they're remedied much faster through these better quality conversations that come from a higher level of CQ. And then one other piece of really good news is that unlike the problems of the past with trying to train on communication and soft skills and people skills, training on soft skills is now truly possible. What we found is with only 6 hours of instruction spread out over 4 weeks, an hour and a half over 4 weeks, with a little bit of one-on-one coaching for specific conversational development needs, we're able to use scorecarding to actually demonstrate progress and improvements made in their people skills. And so now I think the tables have really turned. How long does it take to improve processes or software for that matter? So now we have the ability, as long as we do it strategically and focus on key business results that we're looking for, we can actually improve people's and teams and organizations' soft skills in a measurable way with minimum amounts of time and training. So the conversation quotient, or CQ, now allows the people component of business productivity and talent development to be strategic, actionable, and measurable. So when we look at that trilogy again of people, processes, and technology, the people component doesn't need to be avoided. And in fact, it's one of the biggest opportunities in business now because we can affect the performance and results in that particular area so much faster now than we can improve processes and technology. So I hope I've given you enough information to kind of provoke some excitement and the opportunities that you could have in your organization. And I'd be happy to talk to you about how this approach could be helpful with your organization. Feel free to reach out to us through the website anytime, and we'll look forward to talking to you sometime soon. Thank you.